Hello, John Dove here. So we've had the first debating session of 2023 tonight. It's been quite a fun session, and I'm sure all of our members have enjoyed the sort of fast and furious style of the debate that we do here. So I've been watching some of the debaters, and I'm going to share some feedback and some tips based on what I've seen. So I'm going to start just with some very basic presentation points. So what a lot of people did in the introduction was they began with setting out whether they were either proposing or opposing the motion and giving an indication as to how many points they were going to make and what they were. So they would say, I am here to propose the motion. Within my submissions, I will be making 3 points, and those points will be X, Y, and Z. And this is a really good way to start because it gives us a roadmap. We know exactly where you're going with the submissions, and then we know what to expect. So it's like any form of presentation. You'll always set out at the start what it's about and what the sort of structure is. So it's a really good way of sort of pinning your colours to the mast at the beginning. Like any other form of presentation, you need to think about your presentation style as well. So one comment that I made tonight was that you need to think about the pace at which you speak. So the pace should be relatively slow. So about 100 to 120 words per minute is probably about right. And the reason for that is you need to make sure that your audience, your judges, whoever's judging the debate can actually hear what you're saying and can follow along. If you're speaking too quickly, particularly for judges who are going to be making notes, they might miss good points that you're making. So by speaking slowly, everything can be heard. But more importantly, that slower pace just adds that air of conviction to your voice. Stemming on from that point, you also need to think about sort of voice modulation as well. So if you speak at sort of a very steady, monotone voice, it can get quite boring quite quickly. And a boring presentation is not a persuasive presentation. So think about various points that you can maybe increase the voice, maybe drop the voice for certain points. So you might be making a strong point and say, one of my strongest points is, whatever it might be, but you can use that voice intonation to really feed into the submissions that you're going to make. The next point I'm going to make is in relation to structure. So given that debaters only had 5 minutes to give their submissions tonight, 3 points is probably there or thereabouts what you can get in, or what you can sort of shoehorn into the length of time that you have. So 3 points is probably about on the money, I would say. So it gives you about 1.5 minutes each for each of the 3 points. And you really need to think about the order in which you make those. So what I would always say is start with your strongest point and work backwards. So think about the motion for this debate. Think about what the strongest point is and potentially what your opponent might also argue as well. And you would lead with that and then go on to sort of peripheral points as well. What you also might want to do as well, it's similar to judicial intervention when it comes to legal advocacy, but you also want to think about what your opponent might say in their submissions, and you can deal with that in your own. So you can potentially build up part of your opponent's argument within your submissions and say, well, you may be convinced that X, Y, and Z. However, this is a weaker argument than my own because, and then knock that down and present some of the stronger points. So think about how you can deal with that nice and early. Now, of course, most of you in the room are aspiring lawyers. And of course, if you were doing any form of legal presentation or legal advocacy, generally speaking, you would be backing up your submissions with evidence. Debating is no different. So if you've got a way of backing up your points with evidence, that just adds that air of authority and makes your points even stronger. And then when it comes to the rebuttals as well, so you had 2 minutes at the end for rebuttals. And what you would normally look to do with this is treat this 2 minutes as a mini speech. So if your opponent made 3 points and you're going to try and knock down all three, say, I'm going to deal with my opponent's 3 points in turn, and then deal with them one at a time, rather than sort of, mismatching, deal with 1 point here, 1 point there. Have a structure to it, deal with 1, 2, and 3, and knock them down in turn. And once again, try and keep that slow pace, keep controlled, keep calm, and that's the best way to knock that down. I think finally, the point I'm going to end with is simplicity is key. So I was watching one particular debater tonight, and this debater did quite well just by keeping the presentation nice and simple, nice and professional. There was no sort of excessive language in there. So, lots of adjectives that didn't need to be in there. The points were kept nice and simple. So it was an easy argument to follow. And an easy argument to follow is normally the most persuasive. So don't think that you need to sort of convolute the argument or anything like that. Sometimes the simplest argument is the best. So I hope that you've found those tips helpful.